Dreams. Everyone has them. Some good, some bad. However, as humans, we cherish the idea of sleep as a way to recover and rest after a long and tiring day. But what happens when your dreams seem all too real? Too real to the extent in which your dreams leach out into reality. People all over the world have reported seeing a mysterious figure from their nightmares, not only in their mind, but in between sleep and being awake. This is not a new phenomenon. Since written records have existed, they have told stories of this frightening nighttime vision that takes your breath away and pushes on your chest. People report the feeling of being paralyzed with terror, as if they are frozen from the inside out. This image of what is causing these disturbances in the night is remarkably consistent through time. A tall, pitch-black silhouette with a brimmed hat. Today on Unblurring the Unknown, we dive into the mystery of the Hat Man. Welcome back to Unblurring the Unknown. I am your host, Dominic, and today is a very interesting topic, and a topic that I am very excited to research into, as this was, a topic, the Hat Man, that I have obviously seen a lot about on the internet, but have never really done a whole lot of information on it, and it was something very interesting just to think about. The idea of this figure, whether it be spiritual or paranormal, that kind of exists, in between the realms of what we know and what we don't know, is a very fascinating concept. And it was very interesting looking into this and kind of expanding my horizons and my topics out there a little bit. But that being said, for today's episode, there are a lot of parts to this, and this topic is complex, and the idea of the Hat Man as an entity, and even more as an urban legend, has skyrocketed in popularity. So, how I am going to do today's episode is that we are going to talk about what sleep paralysis is, because that plays a big role into the idea of the Hat Man and the lore of the Hat Man. What causes sleep paralysis? Why does the Hat Man appear and is seen by people? And then we're going to go into some accounts and sightings of the Hat Man, and then kind of break it down into theories about what the Hat Man truly could be. Now, before we dive into what the Hat Man is, let's look into what sleep paralysis is. Now, what is sleep paralysis, and what causes it? Sleep paralysis can happen to anyone for any number of reasons, most of which haven't fully been understood by science yet. However, most researchers believe it has to do with REM sleep, or rapid eye movement, and that REM sleep getting disturbed over the course of the night has something to do with sleep paralysis. Now, sleep paralysis is when you are conscious, but you are unable to speak or move while you are sleeping. It is most common in people who have other sleeping disorders, but it can also happen to anyone. Now, the earliest clinical account of sleep paralysis dates all the way back to 1664, and over the course of history, there have been a very dark and negative theme surrounding sleep paralysis, and in history it has been associated with just evil, and then evil spirits, or even demonic entities, black magic, and even monsters. It's been associated with pretty much everything that has to do with the concept of evil and the concept of just spirits that are just not good. That has been the consistent theme through every single culture, and I think that has to do with possibly people seeing things that they couldn't fully understand while under the effects of sleep paralysis. Now, cultures all over the world had different spirits or creatures, in their regions to explain what was happening when sleep paralysis took place. For example, in Egypt, they believed that this was some sort of jinn, or a genie, that was believed to cause sleep paralysis. And even through all these years, science is still trying to fully understand what causes sleep paralysis. And where does this idea of seeing things or seeing, for lack of a better term, demons during sleep paralysis comes from? Now, if you've done any research or looked into sleep paralysis before, you can see the connection between this affliction of sleep paralysis and people seeing things that they cannot fully explain. Now, why is that? Science actually has this answer. Now, during sleep paralysis episodes, your brain often blends what's real with what isn't, and that can cause some pretty wacky stuff. Now, this leads to these perceptions of things being around you that aren't really there, even though you think they are. Now, these experiences are then grouped into 3 categories, and based off of hallucinations, as that your brain is playing some trick on you, and it's thinking that something's going on when in reality it isn't. Now, the 3 type of hallucinations that your brain can come under during sleep paralysis is, firstly, there are intruder hallucinations. Now, these are the ones that involve seeing someone or something menacing in your bedroom that, again, you assume or you think is another human being or something completely different altogether. Secondly, there are vestibular hallucinations that involved imagined bodily movements, out-of-body experiences, and unusual feelings or sensations. Now, the third category of hallucinations being chest pressure hallucinations. Now, these involve the feeling that your chest is being pressed on or the feeling of being suffocated. Now, obviously, that's a pretty scary thought to think about, especially when you are sleeping and you think of sleep as a tranquil way to kind of relax and refresh for the next day. Now that we've gone over sleep paralysis, some of the types of hallucinations people can experience while under sleep paralysis, let's get into the history of the Hat Man. Now, what is the Hat Man, and where did he come from? Now, the lore or myth behind the Hat Man is kind of uncertain, but it seems that the description of the Hat Man has remained consistent as the myth has grown throughout the 2000s. But the most intriguing thing of the Hat Man is that cultures all around the world report seeing him, and this description remains the same. He's anywhere from 6 to 10 feet tall. His eyes have been reported to be red or sometimes with no color at all, and has been said to be wearing a trench coat and a large brimmed hat. The Hat Man does not make a sound, and he doesn't try and hurt you, which is different from other sleep paralysis, quote-unquote, demons. The Hat Man often just stands in the corner of your room, shrouded in darkness. However, he is also reported to hover over you as you sleep, like staring at you, but he doesn't harm you. And the most consistent stories is that the Hat Man just is kind of an observer. He's not there to harm you, but he's almost just there watching you, which I don't know if that's creepier than somebody trying to harm you while you're sleeping or just somebody just watching you while you sleep. I mean, I've kind of, very first episode I did over the Cape Intruder, and that was, that was a human being. That wasn't a spiritual presence or anything like that. But the idea of being watched as you sleep is kind of a very unsettling thing. Because again, sleep is something that you think about, as a way to refresh, relax, and you kind of think, you're in the safety of your own home. You're not expecting somebody else to be in your bedroom with you as you sleep. Obviously, 2 very different circumstances, but I felt like I'd kind of compare a little bit to the feeling of being watched while you sleep. Now, many people associate the Hat Man with the idea of shadow people, or the idea of feeling or seeing a presence that could be connected to the paranormal or even the supernatural. Now, these shadow people can manifest in mist-like shapes, but also in humanoid forms, or however they could be a completely separate figment of reality itself. Now, the Hat Man and and Shadow People are very much different, and you could honestly do a whole topic on Shadow People. And the idea of Shadow People really is, like I mentioned, a whole topic in and of itself. And you could go into the whole realm of Shadow People, but I think where Hat Man differs from the Shadow People is that Hat Man is consistently seen, and the description remains the same. Like, people continue to see this figure with the brimmed hat. You know, why is this specific shadow person or spiritual entity or paranormal entity continually showing up in people's kind of realities, or in between what you think is real and what isn't? It's very interesting that he continues to appear in the way that he does. Now, Hat Man has also been associated with high consumption of the drug Benadryl. Now, this idea of him showing up after taking an excess of this drug got popular on sites like Reddit and 4chan in the early 2000s, as people would be sharing their experiences of supposedly seeing the Hat Man after taking excessive amounts of Benadryl. Now, people have also reported seeing the Hat Man after taking other mind-altering substances or narcotics. Now, Benadryl, if you don't know, is an allergy medication, and its primary ingredient is, and if I butcher this, I apologize, its main ingredient is diphenhydramine. Now, excessive consumption of this diphenhydramine can be extremely harmful to you. Symptoms of a diphenhydramine overdose include rapid heartbeat, low blood pressure, nausea, vomiting, seizure, and even death if not treated soon enough. Now, if you look into Benadryl and overdoses on diphenhydramine, you will go down the rabbit hole and you'll find out that a couple of years ago there was this trend on TikTok called the Benadryl challenge, where people would take excessive amounts of Benadryl in an attempt to get a diphenhydramine overdose. And because of the kind of the euphoric or hallucinations that people would get. Now, if you dig down to that rabbit hole, you'll find out that TikTok censored all those hashtags of, the hashtag Benadryl challenge. Those are all blocked now. You can't really find it. And basically, TikTok will refuse that challenge ever existed. However, because of that trend being so popular, people actually died from Benadryl overdoses because they took way too much diphenhydramine, had seizures, and they died. So it's very, very dangerous. And you wouldn't think something such as an over-the-counter allergy medication could be that dangerous. However, it extremely is. So again, I want to stress the importance of that, to not go out and do this, because this is extremely dangerous. Please do not do it. If you want to say, hey, I want to see the Hat Man, I'm going to overdose on diphenhydramine, please do not do that. That is not at all what you should be doing. And again, you have to realize just the risk of over-the-counter medications and any drug in general. There is a limit to how much you can take, and this is exactly a perfect example of that. Now, why is this important about the whole diphenhydramine and Benadryl and people seeing the Hat Man after taking excessive amounts of diphenhydramine? Now, because after doing some digging, within the corners of the internet, there are groups of people that use diphenhydramine to get high and experience the hallucinations caused by it. Now, there's a whole subreddit on the website Reddit with roughly 50,000 members, and that subreddit is r/DPH, or that's basically the acronym for diphenhydramine. So r/DPH. That whole subreddit contains a whole bunch of images of users posting pictures of piles of pink Benadryl pills, and basically glitch-filled memes about psychosis and disassociation with reality because of the hallucinations that the users get from diphenhydramine. And some of those memes even contain images of seeing the Hat Man, or jokes about the Hat Man, or saying, hey, I'm going to take all this diphenhydramine, disassociate with reality, and I'm going to see the Hat Man. Very just strange, bizarre stuff. And, Now, frequent users of diphenhydramine claim that, using this drug, it's not a fad, in that it has its own ability to, I guess, transport the user to and this is a quote unquote, realm where the glitch reigns supreme and perception of reality begins to crack. Now, kind of interpret that as you will, but that sounds a lot like, other, illegal hallucinogens such as possibly mushrooms or LSD. But again, I haven't done research on what hallucinogens do to your body to an extent. So this kind of going down this rabbit hole of diphenhydramine and what it does to your body was very, very interesting. Now, diphenhydramine, since it is an allergy medication, targets histamine blockers in your system and brain. Now, if you don't know, histamine is a chemical in your body that naturally releases when it detects an irritant. Now, it is responsible for your runny noses and sneezes, as the histamine's main goal is to flush out said irritant. Now, when all of your histamine blockers are filled up by the diphenhydramine, the excess of it, the extra amount, targets your acetylcholine receptors. Now, the acetylcholine receptors help transmit information to the brain and aid in muscle function. Acetylcholine is also responsible for your feelings such as sexual arousal and digestion. Now, because of the excess diphenhydramine, it's already clogged up your histamine blockers because you've already took the regular amount that does that normally. That's the drug's job, is to clog up your histamine blockers. Now, because of the extra amount that you've ingested, for example, it now attacks the acetylcholine, and this negatively impacts your brain's function to make new memories, take in information. It can cause short-term memory loss, and just to lay those out there, and it could even just full-on delirium will set in, honestly. And now long-term abuse of diphenhydramine has been linked to an increased risk of dementia, Alzheimer's, and just general amnesia. Now, like I mentioned before, people have died from these overdoses, and people report that, these trips on diphenhydramine, some are tranquil and relaxing, while others feel like, and I quote, so this is a quote from a 15-year-old boy who suffered from a diphenhydramine overdose. He lived through the experience, but this was a quote about what he said about a diphenhydramine overdose. He said it felt like, and I quote, like a machine gun was going off in my chest, close quote. So not fun at all. Don't do it. Don't do this. And I will not stress that enough, to just don't do this. Now, how does the Hat Man play into this? Now, not everyone sees the Hat Man when they suffer from a diphenhydramine overdose, but sightings are remarkably consistent with users at the height of a trip, and them seeing a shadowy, menacing figure that resembles the Hat Man, believe it or not. And as more users started sharing experiences of the Hat Man, the legend almost grew from, urban legend and myth to kind of this TikTok social media kind of villain. The best comparison I can make is like Slenderman. However, the difference here is that the Hat Man stories seemingly have some basis in reality because people keep saying that they see him and the descriptions are the same. Whereas, the Slenderman has no basis in reality. That is pretty consistent. Slenderman was made up on the internet. He does not exist. However, the Hat Man legend seems very different because the stories are different. Like, it's a little bit of a different circumstance, but again, it's kind of the myth and the lore and the urban legendness of it kind of always raises that into question. Like, does this figure, whatever it may be, is it real? Does it exist? What is it? Because there's more evidence to support that just by straight up experiences that the Hat Man is some sort of actual entity that exists between where you sleep or in different planes of reality that people who suffer from, or not suffer, who partake in diphenhydramine apparently see. So, very complex. And going over the whole diphenhydramine and Benadryl and this allergy medication and people seeing him when they do this drug is very interesting, because even though they are on drugs and the world is still kind of a completely different reality that they're experiencing, it's interesting that they say they see him, whether they're off their marbles or not. I think it's still compelling that they're seeing him and that it's the same description over and over again. However, I'm not excusing the fact that they are still using an over-the-counter medication and abusing it. But that makes it more compelling than any other, social media, TikTok, Reddit kind of bad guy or made-up supernatural entity, because I think there's a little bit more facts to go along with the idea of the Hat Man being a physical entity. That being said, let's now move into a couple of encounters of people who have said that they've seen the Hat Man. Now, the Hat Man Project is a blog that in which people who have had encounters with the Hat Man can share stories. And that being said, I found a couple of the most recent stories that I felt were compelling, and one of the stories is more on the realms of, sleep paralysis, whereas the other story seems very much like, okay, this individual is using narcotics and sees the Hat Man in other ways. So I wanted to get both sides of the coin in terms of encounters and experiences. Now, I will now go over the first story that I found off the Hat Man Project blog. And there is numerous upon numerous upon numerous. So you can go to the Hat Man Project and you can just endlessly scroll forever about people who've supposedly seen the Hat Man, and so on and so forth. So, I will start the first story right now. I was 6 years old, living on a farm in a small town in Maine. We had just moved in, and something about this house didn't feel right. Each member of my family had experienced something supernatural, but none of us had ever seen the Hat Man until we moved there. We all wished we hadn't. When bedtime came, I would go to sleep, but I never remembered walking up to my window. It felt like I was stuck there, staring out at the field that my window overlooked. In that field there was a cemetery. Night after night I would see this ominous black figure slowly approaching the house. Every night it would come closer until it was inside the house. I could hear the slow, methodical footsteps downstairs. It always sounded like it was wearing heavy boots of some kind. I reached a point where I would be wide awake, waiting, somehow able to sense that it was coming. I would hide under my covers, praying for it to go away. It was torture to listen to the approaching footsteps as they climbed up the stairs, knowing they were heading towards my room. I was paralyzed, unable to move or scream. My bedroom door would creak open, revealing the figure, but it never crossed the threshold of my room. It stood between 7 to 8 feet tall, dressed in a solid black outfit that included a wide-brimmed farmer's hat and a long duster coat. The eyes glowed red, and I couldn't seem to help but stare at them in fear when it revealed itself. Terrified, I remained hidden under the covers, unable to speak, and silently screaming for help. For some reason, I would always pass out and then wake up sometime later. After I felt that the Hat Man was gone, I would run to my older sister's room for comfort. She was aware of everything that was happening and had seen it herself several times. It was a truly terrifying experience, one that still haunts me to this day. I continue to have nightmares, although I can't recall if the figure has appeared in any recent ones. That ends the first story. Now, that one seems very much on the realm of sleep paralysis, that the Hat Man is a paranormal entity and, somehow appears during sleep paralysis or appears in general. But that story is completely different than this second story and how the Hat Man seemingly appears in much different ways. Now, this is the second story that I pulled from the Hatman Project blog. In the summer of 2017, I began experiencing astral journeys. During the last 3 weeks of August, I would visit a place in space where I would observe groups of people talking to each other. In the last week, a blonde woman caught my attention. I immediately felt that she had knowledge of me and a strong emotional connection. I approached the group and stood next to the woman, asking her, "Who are all these people?" She replied, "We are all experiencing what you are currently experiencing, the astral realm." Suddenly, the woman and everyone in the group became frightened and started looking behind me. I asked what was happening, and she pointed above me. While they all looked terrified, I turned around and looked up, spotting a shadow figure observing all of us. It was a dark figure with red eyes and a hat. I felt a deep unease seeing the terrified expressions on the faces of the people. Without hesitation, I moved towards the black hat man to confront him. But before I could touch him, he disappeared from the plane. I tried to chase after him and saw the face of a well-known man in his office. We engaged in a verbal fight, and he began to smile. Suddenly, I lost consciousness amid the astral experience, unable to return to my physical body. The next morning when I woke up, my body was acting differently from the commands my mind was trying to send. I visualized the man laughing in my mind, while involuntarily I was compelled to harm myself. Despite my efforts to resist, my anger grew, leading me to kick a chair that had a pair of sunglasses on it. The sunglasses cut my finger, resulting in a need for surgery. The surgeons performed 40 internal stitches and 20 external stitches to rebuild the extensor sinew in my index finger. The scar on my finger is now a prominent mark. At that time, no one believed me, even though I tried to explain that it was related to the entity. Nobody listened or offered help, leaving me alone to deal with my troubled mind. Since then, I have never experienced a conscious dream in the past 6 years. Every night I lose consciousness and wake up with aches and confusion about my whereabouts and what is happening. This lack of dreams complicates my daily life significantly. And that ends the second story. Now, like I said, this second story is drastically different from the first, and these stories are posted anonymously, and I am not trying to discredit this individual story whatsoever. But I just can't really believe this, and I guess I kind of feel bad because the guy or woman in the story is saying, "Hey, nobody believes me on this," but this second story is that this individual is clearly taking some sort of narcotic or even diphenhydramine or something in that nature that allows the individual to feel like they are being transported to an astral realm where they experienced the Hat Man. Whereas, the first story very much had a supernatural or paranormal feel to it, like I said, in that the Hat Man just kind of seems to appear at will, whereas this second story seems like he's more of a spiritual entity, and he kind of resides in between reality or the astral realm or planes of existence. But to me, it sounds very much like the individual in the second story took a foreign substance, and it sounded more like a hallucination than anything else. So that being said, that kind of takes us into theories about, what is the Hat Man? Is the Hat Man real? What is the Hat Man? So my first theory is that the Hat Man is some sort of paranormal entity. He is like a ghost or a poltergeist or something in that nature that kind of can manifest at will and afflicts people for a variety of different reasons and is seen by a variety of different people for a bunch of different reasons. Whether he is the paranormal entity that appears during sleep paralysis or he is just kind of a figure in general that just kind of maybe feeds off some sort of negative energy, and that's how we can appear in, multiple different houses, or kind of at will, sort of speak. But that is just the first theory. The second theory being that this is strictly something that people see during sleep paralysis, and that this is a case of pareidolia. Now, if you don't know what pareidolia is where the brain looks at something and tries to basically make it make sense. So that pareidolia is often responsible to where you look at something, and it's the reason something looks like a human face. It's the whole Jesus and the toast idea, where you look at something and your brain connects the dots and makes you think that you're looking at something that is human in nature, but in reality, it's not. It's your brain trying to put together the puzzle pieces to explain what they're looking at, and your brain is trying to tell you that it is human in some sort of nature, because that is how your brain is hardwired to work. Now, this theory basically hinges off the idea that during sleep paralysis, people are, looking in the corner of their room and then suffering from pareidolia, which makes them think that there is some sort of human entity in their room watching them, which is a very intriguing and valid theory. Now, the third theory is that the Hat Man is some sort of spiritual entity, and as I previously mentioned, is able to transcend planes of existence or float through reality itself. Now, this theory I don't really believe, and that's only because, again, I'm very much a factually based person. To me, this is, and especially what I went over with hallucinations and diphenhydramine and what it does to your brain, and even narcotics in general, what it does to your brain and what you're able to see and what you do see, I just can't really understand why people are seeing the Hat Man during, trips on diphenhydramine or a narcotic like LSD or something like that. Why the Hat Man's being seen, but to me, I can't believe it, because it's your brain hallucinating and thinking that you're seeing something that you're probably not, especially when you are on drugs and you feel like you were in some different plane of existence. When you're still on Earth, you're still in the same reality, but your brain is kind of disconnected from where you currently are. So that being said, it makes the third theory hard for me to believe, but maybe that is just because I have not done a whole deep dive into kind of the theories around time and planes of existence and things of that whole nature, which kind of gets out of the realm of, the unexplained paranormal stuff of that nature. But it could be something that I look into in the future, because it is kind of intriguing. So that being said, what is my theory on what the Hat Man is? And I think it's kind of a mixture of theory 1 and theory 2. I think that some people who see the Hat Man are suffering from sleep paralysis, and it is a case of pareidolia, and that they're seeing something that they cannot explain, and their brain instantly plugs it in to thinking that it is some sort of shadow figure or sleep paralysis demon that is causing them to see this. Why the pareidolia that is manifesting in their brain puts a brimmed hat on this person, I don't know, and maybe that is something that we will never fully understand. But then a part of me also believes that this is some sort of paranormal entity, and that it's manifesting itself much like, a ghost or a poltergeist would, and that kind of adds to the mystique in the legend of it, on whether, the Hat Man is a real entity or whether it is a figment of our imagination, and it is our brain trying to fill in the empty space that it has, during sleep or during being affected by narcotics or diphenhydramine or something of that nature. So I think the Hat Man is a combination of pareidolia and possibly a paranormal entity. But I want to know what y'all think. I mean, for those of people who are more connected spiritually than possibly I am, I'm not inferring what you all do on your free time, because frankly, that's none of my business. But if somebody has, or feels like they have a deeper connection to the, astral realm of existence, or you have even seen the Hat Man during one of these astral plane experiences, or have suffered from sleep paralysis and have seen the Hat Man, or have suffered from sleep paralysis in general, and want to share your experience, please do that with me. You can, if you're listening to this on YouTube, feel free to comment underneath. Tell me your story. But you can also email me your story at unblurringtheunknown@gmail.com. While you're there, you can also send me topic suggestions about what you want to hear from me going forward. It kind of helps me out, helps me better roadmap my plans for episodes going further. Now, if you are listening to this on YouTube, I am also on Spotify, so please go ahead and turn on notifications on Spotify. You will be notified every time I post a new episode, and if you are listening to this on Spotify, same thing goes for YouTube. Please go subscribe to my YouTube channel and comment. Helps me out with the algorithm gods, and I greatly appreciate it. With that being said, I think that's going to conclude today's episode on the Hat Man. Very interesting one, very kind of different from what I've done before in terms of episodes, but I had a lot of fun researching it, and there was a lot of information online about it. So if somebody else wants to do a deep dive digging and kind of send me what you found, I also greatly appreciate it. But let me know. Again, if you suffer from sleep paralysis and you have personally seen the Hat Man, please send me over your experience. I'd love to hear about it. Or if you are deeply connected to the astral realm, or maybe partaking in something that I personally would never do, send me that story as well. Again, if you send me any of that, I will keep it completely anonymous, and your secret's safe with me. But that being said, that is going to conclude today's episode on the Hat Man. Like I said before, I hope you all enjoyed it, and I will see you all on the next one.